Hello, and welcome to yet another episode of the Back to the TARDIS podcast, the podcast where we take a look at every single episode of the 2005 revival of BBC's Doctor Who. I'm Jeff.
I'm Skylar.
And I am Dirk Strider.
And today we are discussing Series 6, Episode 4, The Doctor's Wife, by noted British novelist Neil Gaiman. This is his first contribution to the show. He was a lifelong fan. And this one's an all-timer for me.
Yeah.
Like I'm really like this has been one of the ones, like, sometimes the this is the 10 out of 10 like slam dunk best episode of the season episode. Sometimes those were like surprises. Like now that I've rewatched it, and now that I rewatched it for the podcast, it makes sense that oh yeah, obviously Dalek is a slam dunk. But at the time that I first rewatched it, it had been so long. And I think the last time that I watched it, I was young enough that I didn't really get it. This one has always consistently been one that I have held in very high regard. And I mean, I think it makes sense because a very good author wrote it.
Yeah, same here. I mean, in years past, when I didn't really do this for like a weekly basis, I thought it was good, but now, having gone through we're going on 6 series, it's getting pretty apparent what makes a story good, and there's some things I could nitpick, and I'm sure we'll get there when we get there, but even those are more of a product of the series overall, and less so Neil Gaiman and the core story.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
Interestingly, we didn't have any clear memories of this episode and remembered it being kind of bad, but yeah, I mean, I did enjoy it. It was really good. It was a bit of a surprise to me, yeah, because I didn't remember it very clearly. I think we generally don't have the clearest memories of Matt Smith era, but this one particularly, I got through the first 5 minutes and I was like, oh, I remember this episode. I remember not liking it. But then as it went on, I was like, yeah, okay, I see where this is going. I like this.
Yeah, definitely. One thing I'll come back to this throughout the discussion of the episode, I think, but one of the things that really stood out for me is one, surprisingly, for being mostly set in a dark junkyard, the visual design of the episode is really good, especially because I watched this one on my monitor on the Blu-ray version, so it was all high res and was very nice. And also, this is kind of a weird outlier, and I honestly wish more of the era had been like this, where it's got all the hallmarks of Moffat Who, but it's got the edge and occasional macabreness of RTD. Which, I mean, it makes sense because a lot of the edge and the horror that is done here is right up, if you read stuff like Coraline or American Gods or something, that's absolutely the type of stuff that Neil Gaiman writes, which is good. It's a really good fit, basically. Yeah. So we this pre-credit scene where Idris is let in, and there's the line of, nephew will drain your mind and your soul from your body and leave your body empty, and the way that it's just so matter-of-factly delivered.
Yeah.
There's definitely a very particular style here.
Yeah.
Like you said, it has that sort of gothic horror-esque thing going. And I think there's a few things that mark it as sort of coming from a more RTD mentality, and I'm assuming that Gaiman was probably a fan of the RTD era and came on to write an episode that was similar to that, with sort of his experiences with the RTD era in mind, because he obviously brings back an Ood, and is this the last time we see the Ood? I'm not
No,
actually sure.
they keep showing up.
Okay.
Yeah. So fun, or I guess interesting trivia point. There's a lot of points at this episode where Gaiman wrote like stuff that would basically be out of budget. So production and Moffat kind of worked together to be like, okay, you got to pare this back. So for example, Nephew originally was a completely new alien, but they were like, yeah, we can't do that. So here's an Ood. It's already creepy, and it has the thing where like a presence can speak through it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and in general, like I mean, this might just be because this episode like gives that the feeling, but like generally, like the Ood show up a lot, but it very much feels like oh okay, let's just pull something out of the prop and costume closet because we don't want to make something new.
Yeah, and I mean it works. And I think, yeah, it again adds to that sort of RTD-esque feel. Supposedly, when he first started writing his script, he was writing this with David Tennant in mind, which is, I guess, interesting when you consider what show he would go on to write for that would feature David Tennant and another actor.
And Michael Sheen.
Yeah. So that's fun, but yeah, and then it got pushed back, and then this was originally going to be the 11th episode of Series 5, which would mean that the Lodger didn't exist, so I guess take it or leave it there.
Yeah.
So obviously there were some rewrites, but we'll get more into that.
Yeah,
it's an interesting
Rory
episode.
had to basically be given stuff to do in this episode because it was not initially written with him in mind. And it got pushed back because it was just too expensive for the season at that time, which is why the Lodger is super basic because it's cheap.
Yeah.
But I'd also like to piggyback off of Dirk's thing. I think maybe there's a little bit of RTD, but I also, from what my classic knowledge, I would actually go back and say that like Fourth Doctor had a period that was notably like very gothic horror inspired and was like the period when the show was getting like the most complaints from like old shitbags like Mary Whithouse, who's like, oh, this is too scary for the kids. So I'd argue that if anything, it's probably a little bit more of that than RTD. It's just that kind of macabreness and horror element plays a little bit more into the way that RTD's tone of the show was. Yeah. So yeah, the Doctor, they're all in the TARDIS, and the Doctor receives somehow a knock at the TARDIS door, and sees this and opens it to find this cube that's a psychic container and an emergency Time Lord messaging system. And we hear about it's apparently from this Time Lord called the Corsair, who is also similarly like a little bit of a renegade. And one of the ones that 11 describes as like one of the good ones. And this is also noticeable because it is the first time that it was the first time that Time Lords being able to change gender through regenerations was mentioned. And so technically that is it was under Stephen Moffat's watch, but it was Neil Gaiman's addition to the canon.
Interesting. I'm pretty sure Gaiman is like good in general. That's a thing I vaguely am aware of.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, like American Gods and Good Omens and Coraline and such are all very good. Yes.
I like the idea that the Doctor's idea of like a good Time Lord is like a renegade like him, and we basically already have confirmation of that with like him being friends with the Master and everything. But just the idea of like, I actually sat back and thought about, it's like a Time Lord getting tattooed just seems like not a Time Lord thing to do. So I don't know. I'm not gonna say like, oh, we deserve like a Corsair spin-off or some bullshit, but it's just like it's a very interesting like it's a good thing that Gaiman does well, that it's like adding color and flavor to a story that like it can say so much or imply so much with so little.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so the Corsair has shown up a couple times in some expanded universe stuff, most notably a comic with 13. But a lot of it has been fairly recent, actually. Yeah. But so he finds out that this distress signal is coming from this planet in a like a bubble universe outside the main universe. Um, and you definitely like. I think this is actually an interesting moment in terms of characterization for 11, where, like, when you get to the Day of the Doctor, it is mentioned that while 10 and I think to some extent 9 carry their perceived genocide of their race with them at all times and can't ever forget it, 11 basically deals with it by running away from it. And in a sense, this kind of applies to it because he's heard that, oh, maybe I didn't actually do this horrible thing, and basically rushes at the first opportunity to go follow them and do it, even when that's probably not a very smart idea and is very dangerous.
Yeah, and I think that's something we see with him again later when we actually get to Time Lord stuff. He still just keeps running at that wall of like, there's a chance.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. Um So upon landing, TARDIS completely loses power, locks down. He mentions that the Matrix, the heart and soul of the TARDIS, has disappeared. And as they step out, they are spotted by Idris, who is now acting completely different, and like runs up to him and like in quick succession, like kisses and bites 11 and mentions like a bunch of weird stuff. There is something that I really like about how the TARDIS in Idris's body is portrayed, as in the sense of it is a being that time does not apply in the same sense to it as it does, which makes sense because it's a time machine. So she's constantly mentioning things from the future. Like there's a point where she basically does 11's technobabble explanation for him, and she's like, okay, well now you don't need to do it because I saw into the future what you said and did it for you.
Yeah. She also, and this is probably an addition, she also says that the only water in the something is the river.
Yeah. Yes, which is foreshadowing.
But yeah, it's a good introductory scene, and despite the many Moffat-isms of how this character as a woman as portrayed, I'm quoting directly here, described as sexy plus motherly plus utterly mad plus serene. Yeah, Moffat, we noticed.
Yeah, Moffat. Yeah, okay, Moffat. Very cool.
But yeah, even despite that, this may sound cowardly and like I'm playing favoritism, but I honestly think maybe it's just combined with Gaiman's writing and the fact that it's the TARDIS, but I'll kind of let it slide with how eccentric she in particular is.
Yeah.
It makes sense.
And I think it's toned down a little bit after that first appearance.
Yeah, it's like eventually she gets used to it and she can sort of compensate for being what is virtually a being outside of time put into a being that experiences time linearly, and having to like reconcile that.
Yeah. It's and I think really like I think like I'll also talk about this a little bit more in depth when 11 and Idris really get time to talk and have like like a heart to heart. But I really feel like this episode is one of those episodes where what it does is so good that it's like nobody should ever do this again. Like, they should never have the TARDIS like really directly speak to the Doctor, or at least never have the TARDIS come into a human-esque form ever again, because this did it so well, and it also made the point that this cannot be a lasting thing. Like, this knocks it out of the park so hard that this can never be done again.
Which is probably good, because if it could be done again, then Chris Chibnall might do something with it.
Yeah. I mean, he might.
I think that was the
but,
unsaid thing we were all thinking.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's what I was, when there gets to be a certain point where it's just like, oh yeah, I stole you, and we've been traveling for like 700 years, and I was just like, okay, so the TARDIS before her is a different one, but it's also a police box, because fuck it, fan service. It was, again, take a drink for another episode. The Timeless Children retroactively has make no sense. You're welcome.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and also like, again, like this, the way for like bit characters who die pretty easily on, there's something that's very like both horrifying and also really funny about Auntie and Uncle, where like Idris collapses and Uncle's like, oh, is that it? Oh, she's dead now. So sad.
I think you mentioned that Neil Gaiman wrote Coraline.
Yes.
Yeah, and so that's a very similar vibe to those two, I think.
Yes, definitely.
Mm-hmm. They originally apparently had a lot more indications that they were like patchwork people, again, budget, but I think it works to the episode's effect that it's very subtle unless you like, unless as the Doctor does, he really starts to look at them. I think it's a creepy, it adds to the horror.
And then when it's revealed, like for like shots where it's like very carefully, like there's some very careful and deliberate camera work there, but like what they do is still very effective and gets the point across very well. And in fact, it looks more realistic than if they like CGI'd it.
Yeah.
So yeah, as mentioned, 11 sees nephew the Ood and repairs his communicator ball. And you hear a bunch of like distress calls. And 11's like, I don't know what's up with that. And Auntie and Uncle and Nephew take everyone to go see the house. And the house is basically this being that exists inside the planet and basically makes this a sentient planet, which is, again, pretty neat idea. House is voiced by Welsh actor Michael Sheen, who would later go on to quite memorably play the angel Aziraphale in the adaptation of Gaiman's novel, well, Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett's novel, Good Omens, which, man, that dude has range, because that's a completely fucking different character.
Yeah, I didn't know his voice could go that low. I mean, there's probably effect on it, but still.
Yeah, it's completely different.
Yeah, House is such a memorable character for being a one-off, and apparently there were drafts where this was the Great Intelligence. I'm glad they went with a more original, like,
I mean, this would have been a better use
topic
of the Great Intelligence than Series 7 was.
Yeah.
Okay, confession. When this episode started, I thought it was Trenzalore. I thought, I was
sorry.
like, oh wait, isn't there an episode like, or they introduced Trenzalore earlier, and I thought maybe this was it, and then I was like, oh no, it's not. Okay, like I got so confused because, you know, it's a very similar looking planet, and then you go in and there's like a voice speaking to you through like another thing, and I was like, is this the Great Intelligence? I feel like it wasn't introduced yet.
Um. So, yeah. 11 and Amy 11 sends Amy and Rory back to the TARDIS, which, again, he's actually like, this isn't necessarily a stupid idea where he's like, oh, this is clearly dangerous and shit's getting real. I need to send them back to what is normally the safest place in an episode, except this time it's not. Which is like a really good like subversion, because like it doesn't happen that much, but normally like a lot of times there is the like, nope, go back to the TARDIS, it's not safe. And normally they're like, no, we're staying. And then this time they're like, he basically tricks them to going there, except it's actually not. It's one of the least safe places in the episode.
Yeah, it's a good narrative reversal, or I guess, yeah, as you said, subversion of that trope. And also it's also very like thematically significant as well, of like the Doctor, when the Doctor doesn't put trust in who he travels with, that often like screws things up even more.
Yeah.
And again, very what early 11 does with the Time War is kind of reminiscent to me of what 10 does with Martha, in just like avoidance. Now, obviously 11 has told Amy and Rory what he has done, but you get to the point in Day of the Doctor where it's like, you get the sense that there's been so much distance from it that it either doesn't sting as much, or that he purposefully forgets things because his attitude is basically like, it's been so long and I can't do anything, and things have gotten so much worse for me anyway. I have more shit to deal with than my past. So it's very rare we see 11 in a position that would mirror 10 or 9, I guess, is what I'm saying, and what I appreciate about this episode.
Yeah. So because 11 mentioned earlier that that he's the last Time Lord, House basically sees that and takes that opportunity to be like, oh, well, all right, I'm out of here later. And he basically steals the TARDIS and traps Amy and Rory inside, while 11 goes and opens a cupboard and finds these distress call boxes. And this is a really nice little scene here where like he gets fucking mad, and it's one of the more like menacing moments that this otherwise fairly honestly not that menacing, as much as they try to play that up in some places. Like what really comes to mind is A Good Man Goes to War, and how despite all of that, it doesn't ever actually quite feel like that lands, but here it does.
Yeah, and again, this feels so weird. Like, it feels like this episode would be appropriate for Series 6, but also just for Series 5, because it just deals more with the Doctor and companions as like characters and how they like interact with each other than the overall overarching plot, even though you could argue that this episode should be able to signal that the Doctor, that 11 has a darker side. It's just, this fucking series, man. I don't know.
Yeah. Vast quality differences, yes. Yeah. So yeah, and this is the scene where he reveals that Auntie and Uncle are basically like patchwork people, which is, again, this is a very sort of Neil Gaiman concept. Like, this is right up his wheelhouse, but again, it's executed so well, how he's literally like, your eyes are literally 30 years younger than the rest of you, your ears don't match, your right arm is 2 inches longer than your left, you have 2 left feet, you're literally patchwork people.
Kind of gave me menacing Clockwork People vibes from.
Yeah.
I mean, almost like it's basically the Ship of Theseus thing, but like more screwed up.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So 11 goes and talks to Idris because she said the boxes will make you angry, and he's like, how the fuck did you know that? And that's when it's revealed that Idris has the TARDIS's conscience inside her. And this really starts something that I think this episode does very well, which is the TARDIS has, for literally like 50 years almost, been treated as a real person, or like a living conscience being. But a lot of the time it doesn't really have agency. And one of the things that I think this episode does so well is sort of retroactively give the TARDIS, which is weird because you wouldn't realize that this would be such a cool or like big thing, but it gives the TARDIS agency, where it's like, oh, like where it's basically says that like the only reason that the Doctor has traveled with the TARDIS for so long is she has explicitly wanted him to basically be the pilot. Like, she chose him as much as the Doctor chose the TARDIS.
Yeah, I definitely like that part. You could argue that the phrase of like, oh, I stole you, you could argue that doesn't really mean anything, but like you get thematically what it's trying to communicate, and it also kind of lays to rest this idea that, you know, beforehand you could kind of write off the Doctor like treating the TARDIS as a person, of being like, oh yeah, boys and their cars, calling them the she pronoun, but like here it's like, no, really, this is a person. And you know, you could write essays on heteronormativity or whatever stuff, but like the point is that no matter like what body you put the TARDIS in, there would be this connection. And that connection would like evoke agency. So yeah, that's definitely a really good part, and it wouldn't work nearly as well if the actress they got for this didn't completely sell this. It's quite an upgrade from being on an episode of the Sarah Jane Adventures.
Yeah. And like the way that like the way, like what she says, where she says like we're like she says, and then you stole me and I stole you, and 11's like, I borrowed you. And Idris says, a borrowing implies the intention to return the thing that was taken, and then subverts your expectation by the line following that being, what makes you think I would ever give you back? Like, there's, it's so wonderfully, like, not one-sided here, that it's one of the things that really contributes to why I don't think they can or should ever do this again, because they did it so well this time.
I just had a thought that another way you can tell this, that some of this was written before Series 6, is that you'd think that she would mention being blown up.
Yeah. Oh no, like one of the times when like the TARDIS sort of manifests as like a being that actively speaks to the characters is in like the Big Finish like 40th anniversary special, which is the like 4-hour long like clusterfuck one where it gets sick of his shit because like he basically like detonates like a anti-time bomb inside the fucking control room, and it basically goes, all right, I've had it, fuck you, I'm out.
You go, girl.
Yeah. So it's a little weird, but you know, it works here, and I don't feel like they can do what they did in Zagreus here, because obviously like this isn't a crazy special like Zagreus is. This still has to adhere to the status quo of the show. So this is when she basically does the Doctor's technobabble for him and is like, okay, let's move on. The TARDIS leaves with Amy and Rory inside it. And basically House starts menacing Amy and Rory. We cut back to the planet. There's again another like really great, it's both horrifying and funny moment where Auntie and Uncle's like, all right, well, guess it's time to die now. And Uncle's last words just like, actually, I feel fine. And then he just fucking falls over.
Big fucking modern social commentary right there. Yeah. Yeah, no, I will say, like, there's definitely, like, I feel like the thing of 11 being like, well, what do I call you? Do you have a name? And Idris's answer being sexy. That's a Moffatism.
Oh, for sure.
That is 100% a Moffatism.
That is the bat signal in the sky Moffatism.
Yeah. It's like that's about the worst that it gets here, honestly.
I'm having this intrusive thought of the flex tape guy in the voice of, I saw this boat in half, except it's, I milfed the TARDIS.
All right, that's the episode title. Congratulations.
Okay. High quality commentary.
Yeah. So Amy and Rory basically pull the like, we can entertain you card, and basically start running through the TARDIS while 11 and Idris attempt to basically use this junkyard of broken TARDISes to build their own. And we get really great more stuff in here where they start like actually bickering. And there's stuff like there's a sign on my front door. You have been walking past it for 700 years. What does it say? Pull to open. And what do? I push every single time. and how like 11's retort is, I think I've earned the right to open my front doors any way I want. And the TARDIS goes, excuse me, your front doors? And also this really great thing where it's like, not only is it great and gives the TARDIS agency, it also is a really great explanation for the past 50 years of content where he's like, hey, you've never really been very reliable. And he's like, you didn't really tend to take me where I wanted to go. And her answer is, I always took you where you needed to go, which for the structure of the show that this is such a perfect answer.
Yeah. Nothing more to be said. It's a killer line.
Like, there's the, like, oh, lol, it's just not very reliable because it's supposed to be, like, an old shitty, like, jalopy, essentially. And then there's on the theme of giving it agency of like, no, every time the TARDIS took the Doctor somewhere they weren't planning to go, there was something that they needed to help out with because of the structure of the show. It's this great fusion of like both like external circumstances as sort of recognizing the tropes and the genre that it falls into, and then in universe. It's so good.
This vindicates me even more because even the TARDIS didn't want to go to Orphan 55.
Damn, man. That shit is sure is true. Anyways, so we cut back to Amy and Rory, and there's stuff going on with they're running away from house, and this gets really into like one of the most horror bits of the episode that is honestly like that this is 100% darker than most of what Neil Gaiman is doing, where there's basically he starts fucking with Amy and Rory and making Amy think that she gets separated from Rory, and every time there's like a time imbalance. So Rory spends significantly longer in there than she does. And it gets to the point where like she sees this vision of him as an old, angry man that has been kept alive and tortured for thousands of years and has like scrawled all these hateful messages on the wall in his blood. And it just goes so much harder than like anything in like the past year of the show had, that it's just like, Jesus Christ.
I remember, there's always the meme of like, oh, you want the kids to be like hiding behind the couch. I may have actually done that.
Yeah.
This may be the only time I've actually done that, because, like, holy shit. And again, credit to Neil Gaiman as a writer. I don't know if Stephen Moffat helped him with this part, but, like, including Rory in such a way that it, like, that it speaks to Amy, because I've always kind of felt that there's, aside from Amy's choice, there's kind of been an imbalance on, like, how we see their relationship. It's mainly seen through Rory's eyes, I'd argue, more than Amy's. But like this gives a really good, like you can tell she obviously cares about him. Like there's no doubt anymore, which is, as it should be. So props to Gaiman for writing that part. Yeah, and including it like very naturally. Yeah. Apparently, originally it was supposed to be some sort of monologue by Amy. She would be trapped and she'd be saying to the house, like, oh, I have so many doubts being his companion. What if I die? What if I get married and he forgets about me? Like, this is so much better. It's not even funny.
Yeah, definitely. Also, shout outs to Karen Gillan, because, like, not only does she react more realistically to Rory's death here than she does like a lot of the other times they do fake out Rory deaths, she reacts more realistically and emotionally to Rory's fake death here than she does when her fucking child is stolen from her in like 3 episodes.
Ouch.
Thank you, Stephen Moffat. Very cool. So, 11 and Idris managed to create a TARDIS control room, which Idris basically powers with a little bit of her vortex energy. Fun fact, that console room is another design contest winner. A fucking kid came up with that.
Huh.
Neat. So, Idris telepathically reaches out to Rory. There's a little bit of Rory vindication here where she calls Rory the pretty one. That's right. She's right. She was right all along.
Apparently they reference this in Legends of Tomorrow, where Rory... Not Rory.
Oh, yeah, Arthur Darvill's in that, yeah.
Yeah, Arthur Darvill is basically the equivalent... He's basically the equivalent of a time agent in... In fact, I think they might call them time agents in that show. But anyway, the time agents have sentient ships, and his is named Gideon, and in one episode Gideon is like kind of personified like how the TARDIS is, and Gideon like kisses him.
Yeah, nice.
Which is apparently a deliberate reference to Idris calling him the pretty one. So.
Nice. And Idris directs Rory to an old console room to turn off the shields so the TARDIS can land. The TARDIS control room that they've jury rigged up can land. So they're led to the old control room from the RTD era, which they actually straight up, like, he'd known that, like, he initially wanted to use a classic control room, but they didn't have any of those actually built anymore, and it would have cost too much money. So what they did instead is they just kept the control room from the RTD era still built, just sitting for like an entire year so they could film this. And then I think they worked it into an exhibition in Cardiff, and then used it for a couple of used it for like Day of the Doctor and some things, and then I think it's been taken down by now. And then
actually good fan service in Doctor Who. Wow.
Yeah. And then the fun fact, I think 11's console room was built on the same set that the hub from Torchwood was built on, which is why they destroy it in Children of Earth.
Huh.
Yeah. Actually kind of good Moffat line here, and this is actually confirmed to be a Moffat edition, where Idris, like the Doctor introduces Idris to Amy and Rory, and Amy's like, she's the TARDIS, and Eleven's like, and she's a woman, and she's the TARDIS, and Amy's response to that is, did you wish really hard?
That was good.
Yeah. And you find out that Nephew got basically disintegrated by them landing. There's actually a nice line here where 11 like feels remorse and basically says like, another Ood I failed to save. Like, Damn. It's nice that they are at least aware of the fact that he's got a terrible track record for this.
He basically wicked witch of the West did that motherfucker.
Yeah.
That was a tongue twister.
Yeah. And the 11 actually tricks House into his own undoing here, where he tells House and lets House delete rooms, which causes House to attempt to delete the room that they're in, which triggers a failsafe that sends them all back to the initial console room, which allows Idris to rejoin with the TARDIS and basically push House out where he dies.
Also, the best line of the episode, fear me, I've killed hundreds of Time Lords. Fear me, I've killed all of them.
Yeah.
That was so good.
Yeah. Yeah, so there is this scene where 11 says goodbye to Idris is actually like a really, really solid, like, there is some fucking emotion here, and like the fact that you can see that like 11 is crying is like, man, that's really good. Because it's like a rare case where that happens.
Yeah. The feeling when you do such a good job as a writer and director and as a production team, just in general, that you feel more emotion at this than when the Doctor marries his quote-unquote actual wife. And I'm sorry, River is only the Doctor's wife because 12 got to act alongside her. That's the only reason I accept it. Yeah. But Yeah, the beautiful scene. I totally buy the connection they have and the history that they have, despite this actress just being here now. Um, Amazing scene.
Yeah, definitely. Um so yeah, and it's basically, all's well that ends well, but there's this really nice ending to it. Uh where he basically like talks to the TARDIS like he normally does, but there's this whole new energy to it where he actually like really knows now, like, okay, you're actually listening, as opposed to just this like, yeah, she's technically sentient, but like, how so? Like, because there was never that back and forth before, and it just really recontextualized everything, and it's really wonderful. So yeah. Anything else anybody wants to say before we move on to ratings?
I'm good.
All right. Thank you for your input, Dirk. Very cool. um yeah, this one's, I like, having seen all of series 6, I'd say that aside from maybe one other episode, this is the standout episode of the season. It's a shame that Neil Gaiman's other like writing credit for this episode kind of got fucked over, because this one's really really good. And like, yeah, like, it really, like I mentioned, the tone is great. It does a lot with a little. The actors are all, the cast is all good. Something that I actually forgot to mention, a lot, like, it's pretty much impossible to do a like, oh, we're going deep inside the TARDIS episode without it turning into a corridor fest. But this is one of the cases where it being a corridor fest actually works. Um and like makes sense. Um the interactions between Idris and the Doctor are just pitch perfect and wonderful, and as I said, add so much agency to this dynamic and this actual like character that's been there the whole time. That I really love. And yeah, it's it does what it does so well that I don't think anybody should ever try to do what it did ever again. A plus, S tier. KINO Raw Goat Swag Poggers.
Blessed be. Um, yeah, this is the clear standout episode from this series so far, unless you count the Christmas special. Which, it's kind of weird where people count those, but anyways, yeah, I admire any episode and any creative team that can take so many limitations, like having to rewrite in an extra character and include extra plot threads and, rewrite for budgeting concerns. And so often you can tell, at least to me, like, particularly in older shows like Star Trek, you can totally tell when they're like, okay, we really can't do this. But here, it's only really visible if you look at the seams. If you, like, really look at everything with a microscope. Otherwise, this is such a good episode. Great character exploration, great dynamics, great side characters, great feel of gothic horror, and kind of combining the best elements of Moffat Who and RTD Who and some elements of classic, as Geoff pointed out, is just, it's a solid Doctor Who episode that does interesting stuff with the sci-fi and interesting stuff with the character and the mythos of the setting. I mean, you can arguably attribute the Master and the Doctor eventually being women to this episode. It probably would have happened eventually regardless, but, like, it's notable. Definite S tier. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a really just generally fun episode. Or I don't know if fun is the right word, but it's an entertaining episode. Um, I think it's all really well acted. Um, I really enjoy the dynamics of the sort of TARDIS in this episode. and just the general aesthetic and visual design of it was really good. That was one thing that really stood out for us. And beyond that, I think just sort of how it plays out is very well done. It's very well paced, and it does interesting things with sort of that core concept of the TARDIS being put in a human body and then just being stuck in a pocket dimension. So, yeah, I don't know. It's a pretty good episode. I would say it's like a 9 out of 10.
Yeah. So next week, we will probably be ranting and raving about the episodes 5 and 6, the Rebel Flesh and the Almost People. Yeah. Until then, you can follow the podcast on Twitter at B2TARDISPod, and you can support us on Patreon for a number of benefits, such as early access to episodes, the ability to listen live to episodes being recorded, and potentially even the ability to guest star on an episode of your choosing. I'm Jeff. You can follow me on Twitter at WheatleyDL.
I'm still avoiding Orphan 55, and you can find me at skyhigh9_5 on the twitter.com.
I'm Dirk Strider, and you can find me at...
And we will see you all next week.